Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra versus the Sony Xperia 1 Mark V. Now, this is a auspicious undertaking to talk about these two phones. They are basically the best of the best of the best you can get in the Android world. We have the tried and true S23 Ultra. Everybody's saying is the best possible Android phone you can get. $1,199. It's a big phone, and it also incorporates the S Pen, a la the old Note, right? So basically, this is just a new Note, but they call it the S23 Ultra. And then we have this prize beauty over here, the Sony Xperia 1 Mark V. This is the 5th generation of their Mark I phone, or of their One phone, as they call it, and this is the Mark V. So, yeah, they're both running a Snapdragon 8 Generation 2, which is fantastic. Like, they look different. They look way different, right? But underneath the hood, there's a lot that's actually very similar. So they both have a Snapdragon 8 Generation 2, they both have 5,000 milliamp battery, and they're both running Android 13. Now, some subtle differences that they have that you might not know about. Well, there's no stylus on the Xperia 1 Mark V. There is a stylus over here. I mean, basically, this used to be the Note, and now it's the big S23 Ultra that we get once a year. And you can see there's some big differences when it comes to the screen. One thing I want to talk about, though, there's no under-the-screen fingerprint scanner over here on the Sony. So it's built into the power button on that side. So it's built into the power button. There's no facial recognition. So if you want facial recognition, you probably don't want the Sony, but we have the ultrasonic fingerprint scanner under the screen over here on the Samsung, and it's the most secure fingerprint scanner you can get on a phone. It works really well. It's like the 4th or 5th generation we've had of it now. It works great, and you also get facial recognition. So this one, fingerprint scanner under the screen, and facial recognition. Sony, fingerprint scanner on the side, built to the power button, no facial recognition. So a couple other things. When it comes to these phones, the Samsung's running One UI. I mean, you can see fundamentally the differences here. The icons look different, and then the background looks different, of course. And basically, they're both running Android 13, but the Sony has more of a stock feature. Like, if you take a look at stock Android, Sony's version of that is basically the same. It's just very, very little change to it, as opposed to the fundamental redesign. A lot of people don't like One UI, but I actually like it. I like it quite a bit, and you get the nice consistency. It's great across the tablet too, because if you've got the Tab S8, later on this year you plan on getting the Tab S9. You've got other you've got other Samsung products. It's very, very easy to pick one up. And also it's great for whenever you're restoring software, stuff like that. One UI is the closest thing we have to kind of an iOS. Now, iOS is, of course, on Apple, but you get a lot of consistency. You get a lot of stuff. The apps carry data over, especially from like the tablet to the other phone. Even messages will carry over if you've got that. So, I mean, there's a lot going on with One UI, and also they're very, very good with software updates. So basically, Samsung, as far as I'm concerned, they're pretty much the best in the Android world when it comes to software updates. Johnny on the spot. They fix things all the time. Sony, they're not quite the best, but they're okay. Like, you get, from what I know, you get 2 years of operating system updates, or you get 2 versions. They don't say 2 years, they say 2 versions. So if it comes with Android 13, you're going to get Android 14 and 15, and you're supposed to get like 3 years of security patches, which is okay, but that's not even like an every month thing all the time. So Sony, their software support is definitely not as good as it is with Samsung. Samsung, you get 4 years of operating system updates. This one started with Android 13, so you're going to get Android 14, 15, 16, and 17. So this one will get Android 15, this one will get Android 17. And then you get 5 years of security patches, and for the first couple of years, they are monthly. So Samsung has really done a great job over the last couple of years getting into like the head position when it comes to software, longevity, support, timeliness, all that stuff. So software, that's kind of what you get. Now, as far as the day-to-day experience, both of them are very good. Now, you can see one big difference. You see that the S23 Ultra is much wider than the Xperia 1 Mark V. That's because they have different aspect ratios, and this is a great opportunity to talk about this because it's very, very different. Aspect ratio basically is kind of the dimensions on the screen and the resolution and how they want to display that, right? So this is a 19:5:9, and this is a 21:9. So this one, 21:9, is taller, but it's thinner, and it's a more cinematic aspect ratio. So if you're watching something in 4K, it basically stretches across the screen. You don't get the little black bars on the top and the bottom. That's what you get over here. You'll get those little bars on the top and the bottom. But a lot of people kind of like the S23 Ultra because you get this huge real estate. And it makes sense because you get the S Pen. Like, if you get an S Pen with this, you really don't have as much real estate. It's actually 0.2 inches narrower So the S23 Ultra is 0.2 inches wider, but also the S23 Ultra is 20% heavier. So that's also a consideration. Like if you hold both of these in your hand, like the Xperia 1 Mark V feels very, very light compared to the S23 Ultra. And also another thing that's interesting, if you take a look at the pixels per inch and how much of the screen real estate is taken up. So pixels per inch is about 500 on the S23 Ultra, and it's over 600 on the Xperia 1 Mark V. So you get more pixels on the screen, even though it's a narrower, smaller screen, but the screen to body ratio is actually quite a bit higher on the S23 Ultra. This one's like 89.9% screen to body ratio. That means when you're talking about the bezels and how much of the screen is actually displayed on the front of it. So it's like 89.9, we'll call it 89%. And if I remember correctly, the Sony is 84%. But either way, they're both great. Now, which is greater? The S23 Ultra. When it comes to like screen brightness, screen quality, 2x AMOLED, not to say that the Sony doesn't look good, but Samsung basically, I think, makes the best screens in the business, and I think the S23 Ultra has the best looking, brightest, best contrast, saturation, everything. Like, it's an amazing screen. But what's nice is they're both 120 Hz refresh rate. So regardless of which one you pick up, they're both 120 Hz refresh rate. But here's one interesting thing. The S23 Ultra is Quad HD+, 1440p resolution, and then you get the Xperia 1 Mark V is full 4K. So you get a 4K resolution on the Xperia, which is nice. They're the only ones that can really brag about that. Sony has been doing this for a while, and it's kind of neat. And one of the nice thing, I can't remember what it's called, but there's a feature when you're watching video on this where you can actually turn on the vibration, and the vibration kind of booms with the phone in time with like the sound experience. So it kind of gives you like a more cinematic experience. It's kind of annoying when you're watching YouTube, but when you're watching an actual video, it's kind of neat, right? So back to the differences. So both of these phones start off with 256 gigabytes of storage. Now, there's supposedly a 512 for the Sony. I have the 256, but it has expandable SD card storage, right? So it can go up to 1 terabyte. So you get 256 guaranteed internal, 12 gigs of RAM, all the models. There's no 8 gigs, so you get 12 gigs of RAM, and then you can put an SD card up to 1 terabyte. So you can actually have like 1.256 terabytes in here versus the max you can get is 1 terabyte on the S23 Ultra. But then the other thing is you got to pay extra for it. So $11.99 to get your foot in the door, and then it costs more money for 512, and then even more money for the 1 terabyte. So if you were to get like a 512 S23 Ultra, it's probably going to be about the same price as the Xperia 1 Mark V. So those are just some instances. They both have Bluetooth 5.3. They both have NFC, so you can do your wireless contact payments, and you also get USB-C charging. So you get 45 watt charging on the Samsung, and then on the Sony you get 30 watt charging. So 30 watt charging, 45 watts. So you're going to be able to recharge the Samsung faster. They both have wireless charging. They both have reverse wireless charging. That means if you get your earbuds or you get another phone, you can turn it on and you can recharge them wirelessly to give them an extra boost. Or it actually works pretty well with the earbuds because they have such a small battery bank. So for instance, you get 5,000 milliamp battery. Most earbuds only have about 400, 500 milliamps, I think. So you could actually siphon off a pretty decent amount of battery, still have plenty of battery in your phone, and then charge your earbuds and use them for quite a bit of time again. So that's actually a nice thing. I don't personally do that because I keep all of my stuff charged, but it's just an option that's floating out there. So that's kind of it when it comes to that. Now, one cool thing you get with the Sony phone is you get a headphone jack. Now, I know you're probably thinking, headphone jack, who cares about that in 2023? Well, it's actually important because you can use it as a line in, you can use it as a monitor port as well. So like, let's say if you're recording, you can plug in are you using an external mic, using the mic that's on here, you can plug in your headphones, you can listen to that so you can hear what your audio levels are. That's really important because when you're recording like I'm doing right now, you might need to set the microphone levels so that way you're not peaking out, you're not blowing out people's ears, it's not sounding all distorted. So it's not like, oh, let me use my old boomer headphones, which of course you can, and I have some of them, but that's not the point. And the other cool thing that you can do is you can actually stream straight from this phone. So using the built-in game software on here, you can stream straight to YouTube, or you can stream directly to YouTube with the video recording app on here as well. That's something that's really cool because you can stream, do a live stream, or you can live stream video games straight to YouTube, which is pretty fantastic. Like, you can't do that over here, right? So it's built into the camera app. That's really neat. It's also built into the gaming app. So it's pretty cool stuff over on the Sony that you don't get on the Samsung. Now, whenever it comes to day-to-day performance on these things, they're both going to get you all-day battery. Now, I'm still testing the Xperia 1 Mark V. They both have the same size battery, but we all know that's not necessarily equal. A lot of it really has to do with software control. Samsung has it down really good. As far as I'm concerned, the S23 Ultra is the best battery you can get in a 2023 flagship. I'm still going to have to test this one more because I've only had it a few days, but the battery life on both of them, the winner for you is they should get pretty good all-day battery life. And that's pretty much for anyone. Like heavy user, light user, you could probably even squeak out 2 days. But when you use them for a day-to-day perspective, they both have the Snapdragon 8 Generation 2. It's the best processor that we've seen in years. Plenty of power, plenty of performance, so good on heat management. And if you were worried about that, it's actually gotten quite a bit better on the Sony. 60% better, or 60% more heat mitigation, basically. So the internal stuff they've done for as far as removing heat and keeping it cooler, 60% more than last year. And then you get the Snapdragon 8 Generation 2. It's supposed to be about 30-40% better on heat. So all that combined means that you should stay cool as a cucumber. Now, there's going to be instances where both of these phones will warm up, especially if you're doing some high-level video recording, maybe GPS, doing some high-level gaming. Yeah, they can start to warm up some, but generally you shouldn't notice really any difference. But that's one thing you can do with these. S23 Ultra records at 8K. You can record up to 8K at 30 and 24 frames per second. No 8K video here. So you can't do 8K recording on the Sony, but you can do 4K at 120. Now, the highest you can do 4K on the Samsung is 60. So you can do 60 frames per second, but you can do 8K recording. Sony, 4K is the highest, but it does 120 frames per second. They both do 4K on the front at 60. Now, when it comes to the cameras, this is a lot, right? So you've got a 48 megapixel camera over here on the Sony, and then you've got a 200 megapixel primary camera on the Samsung. They both take really good photos, and they both have a full complement of cameras. Both of them basically, well, you got 3 cameras over here and 4 over here, but there's one big difference, right? So you get the 100 times super zoom over here. That's because it has a 10 times optical zoom. So it actually has 2 zoom lenses. It's a 3-time optical and a 10-time, but the 10-time will also do 10-time digital. So it'll take you out to 100 times zoom, and whether you want to go with the controversial moon shots and all that stuff works, whatever. Either way, you can take cool moon-looking pictures, but you can really reach out and touch stuff, and it's better than ever when it comes to this phone versus the Sony. They went with a 48 megapixel primary shooter, and it's got a continuous variable zoom. What does that mean? Well, when you have a zoom lens like this, the regular telephoto, you get the 10 times. It's fixed at 10 times zoom. So if you just go straight to 10 time in the camera, you're at optical zoom. That's true zoom. That's very, very good. But then as you zoom in further, it uses a combination of optical and digital. So that's why when you zoom in with your phone, typically it gets blurrier, right? Well, whenever it comes to the Sony, it has basically, it's variable between 85 millimeter and 125 millimeter. So between like that 3 to 5, like 3.5 to 5.2 times zoom. I have to make sure I got that right. Actually, let me look. This is the only time I'm going to look over here. Usually it's all from memory. So when it comes to this one, it is, 3.5 to 5.2 times zoom. It's optical zoom like you get with a DSLR camera. Like normally you see those big lenses they have on the front, and then if you've got a zoom lens, you can adjust it. What that's doing is it's adjusting the focal length, so you're changing it from 85 to 125 millimeters. So when you zoom in at that range, it's to 3.5 to 5.2. It's true zoom. It's lossless. It's not digital, and because of some special lens thing that they've done, that's how they're able to do it. Really cool. I like it, and it gives you a lot of flexibility when you're zooming, and that's something that you don't get with this. Like, you can zoom in basically up to 100 times, but the thing is, if it's not 3 times or it's not 10 times, it's going to be digital combined with the optical, versus when you're shooting with these focal lengths from the 3.5 to 5.2, it's true optical. So I really like that. It actually comes in handy. I use it especially when I'm out recording and shooting video and shooting photos of my son when he's playing soccer, because they really stretch the field a lot. So that's cool. So that's pretty neat. Now, when it comes to the selfie cameras, the selfie camera on the Samsung is better. Now, it's a 12 time. They both have 12 time. They're both 12 megapixel cameras. And you can see here, let me get my screen back open again. So you got the camera up here, the 12 megapixel, and you've also got the one up here is a 12 megapixel as well. So they both work really well. Both do 4K 60. The Samsung, I think, is better. Now, whenever we talk about, like, better is so subjective, right? So whenever you pick up these phones and you point and shoot, largely you're going to have a better photo, better experience with the Samsung. If you know what you're doing with the Sony, and especially if you go hands-on with the manual controls, and one nice thing about the Samsung, it actually does have a pro camera mode. You can do a lot of that stuff yourself, but natively, just using the automatic photo stuff, the Samsung has better computational photography, better AI and machine learning algorithms. Sony relies very heavily on hardware. Like their camera app is not as smart, and it doesn't do as much as the post-processing stuff. So largely, you're going to get a better photo almost most of the time from a point and shoot normally with the Samsung, but the shutter lag is worse, which is kind of annoying. It has gotten better, but the shutter lag is a lot less on the Sony, and also you have a dedicated camera button. So this is something I want to talk briefly about. You have a dedicated camera button, and what's nice is if you press it down and you hold it, it'll take you into the camera app, so that's nice. And then if you press it down partially, it activates the autofocus, so it'll lock on and it'll clear up the image, just like you do with a normal DSLR, a Sony. You press down on it halfway, you get the focus feature, and then you just go ahead and snap it. So the focus, the autofocus, way better on the Sony. The shutter speed is much faster in most instances, and both of them have gotten a lot better at low light. So Samsung, they came out with their own thing called nightography, and they put a lot of emphasis on low light photo taking, low light video, and also on trying to improve skin tones and stuff like that. So the Samsung, they've really made a lot of stride in that department. So better at low light, better at skin tones, but also that was the big thing for Sony this year. The Sony one, really a lot more emphasis. It has a new sensor. It's supposed to be 2 times better on low light. It's supposed to be better on skin tones and stuff as well. So both of them really, I mean, they're top of their game, but when it gets down to it, the Sony, you have a lot of control. You have control over basically everything. Like you have the Sony Alpha camera experience. So whenever you come in here, so this is the basic camera. You can go to auto. So in auto mode, you have a little bit of control over here, and then you can see the little window for the photo. But then you've got so many more modes: P mode, S mode, and then memory recall settings. And let me see. Yeah, so manual exposure. So manual exposure, you get all the controls. Everything. You can change all of this stuff. So there's a whole lot that goes into it. Like, I'm still trying to get better at it, and that's one of the reasons why I bought a Sony in the first place. When I got my Xperia 1 Mark III and then the Mark IV, like, I wanted to get better at like native photography. But then the continuous zoom lenses I really like them a lot. Basically, the Sony is like having a pocket digital SLR or DSLR versus the Samsung is like having basically just about the best smart photography camera you can get in your pocket, absent the pixels. And there's kind of there are differences between both of them, but the Pixel 7 Pro and the S23 Ultra, basically, they're top notch, right? So you can't really lose with either one. But I had somebody had a question in my comments on my last Xperia 1 Mark V video. They're like, how come sometimes the photos look amazing with the Xperia, and then how come sometimes they look like pants? I'm like, well, it really comes down to the person taking the photo. And I said this in my other video. The Sony phone is not for just hey, I just want to do point and shoot photography. Like, if you want to do point and shoot photography, you're really cheating yourself out of the experience, and go get a Pixel or get a Samsung. All you do, you pull it up, you say, hey, this looks good. You tap the shutter, and that's when you get your photo. Whereas with the Sony, it's okay when you do that, but when you go into the manual control mode, you have so much over all, like the focus controls, the white balance, the zoom, just everything. I can't remember all the stuff off the top of my head, but you can change basically everything and get really good photos. So that's kind of the thing. I mean, both of the phones are top notch. I mean, we're talking best quality phones you can get, expensive, both well over $1,000, both supported for several years. Of course, the Samsung wins at that department, but as far as day-to-day experience goes, yeah, fundamentally they are slightly different in several different ways, but I'm going to be honest, the Sony's my favorite, and the Sony fixed so much stuff. But the thing is, the Samsung did too. The S22 Ultra, the Snapdragon 8 Generation 1 we had in both of these phones last year, destroyed both of them as far as like being the best they could possibly be. They had tons of power, but battery, heat, performance, they weren't good in those departments. Now, the Samsung's been like a complete new lease on life, like especially the S23 Ultra. I've gotten 10 hours of screen on time out of this thing, 9 hours, 8 hours, no problem. And I'm going to see what I get over the next couple of days once my adaptive battery kicks in with the Sony. But yeah, New lease on life, both of them. Snapdragon 8 Generation 2 has changed the way these phones work, but they both look and feel the same. Like, they feel like last year's phones, but kind of tightened up, spruced up a little bit. And then the performance, that Snapdragon 8 Generation 2 has just revolutionized so many of the things, so many of the problems we had are gone. And that's why I've said, like, the S23 Ultra, the best phone Samsung has ever made. The Sony Xperia 1 Mark V, it is the best Sony phone they've ever made. And I mean, it's fantastic to use both of them. You can't really go wrong. Now, one area I do want to talk about is accessories. I'll make this very brief. When you go look for Xperia 1 Mark V accessories on Amazon, of course, this isn't even out yet. It comes out in June in Europe. We don't have an official launch date or price in the US. Not a lot of accessories. Now, you can get some screen protectors because they're basically the same as last year for the Sony. But as far as cases, Samsung has a lot more cases, and there's a lot more cases, screen protectors, all that stuff on Amazon. I'll have a link for a couple in the description that I recommend. And of course, the official Samsung leather case is my absolute favorite. It works great. And then you come to the Xperia. I'm actually using my Xperia 1 Mark IV case. It actually fits. I couldn't find anything but some cheap, no-name pieces of garbage on Amazon. But that brings up another thing, pricing. The Samsungs, you can get Samsung financing, you can trade stuff in. Trade-in values really have not been good this year, but there's a lot of ways you can get these through carriers, trade-in deals, financing, all that stuff. There's a lot of ways you can find yourself into an S23 Ultra without breaking the bank or having to spend a ton of money necessarily. The Sony, I mean, I think Sony does some financing through their website, but you basically have to buy this outright somewhere online. You can't go into AT&T, you can't go to Verizon. None of these carriers have them. So yeah, you're going to have to pay out of pocket. You're probably not going to get much in the way of trade-in if it's even available. I'm not even sure what we're going to have for the U.S. offerings because I bought the international one last year, and then Sony was kind enough to send this out as a review unit this year. So both of these phones, fantastic. Basically, they're like the best you can get out on the market. And then if you don't want to spend a ton of money and you want to get a fantastic phone, get the OnePlus 11. I'm just going to plug that one in there. It's $699, same chipset. A lot of the same stuff when it comes to storage and memory, beautiful screen, good cameras. Yeah, you can get that for $699 versus $1199 versus probably $1,300 plus, right? And then we're still waiting to see what, like, the creator kit and different things. Sony with the Xperia 1 Mark IV had the external monitor. There's an external monitor I know that's coming for this one. External hand grip and all sorts of things. So it's really cool stuff. And of course, you know, being able to swap out your SD cards on the fly. There are so many different things. And I didn't even take out the stylus. But of course the stylus, if you want the S23 Ultra, this is a big part of it that makes it special because basically no other phone does this. Well, I mean, the S22 Ultra, all that stuff, but no other phone other than the Samsung Ultras. It's a really nice thing that you can get, right? And then neither one of these, of course, are folding phones. So these are like the top of the best when it comes to flagship Android phones. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up. I know this was a really long video, but there was just so much stuff that I needed to explain in this video, and hopefully it's helpful because I had a lot of folks asking, what's the difference? Which one is better? Look, both of them are great. If you want to do manual photography, this one. If you don't want to do manual photography, absolutely this one. That's pretty much it. If you want to do manual photography, basically have a DSLR in your pocket, but also an amazing Android phone, ta-da, right here. This is it. This is an amazing phone. If you want anything other than that, probably the Samsung is going to be the one you want, but you can't really lose with either of them, right? So that's all I got in this video. If you have any questions or comments, then please go in the comment section. I'll get back with you. And yeah, I know I talked for a long time, but there was really a lot that needed to be talked about in this video because there's so many different things going on with these phones. But that's it. As always, you enjoyed the video, please hit the like and the subscribe button and the little notification bell if you want updates when new videos come out. And as always, thanks for being here. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you guys next time.